Today I'm going to teach you how to sight in an Engage Hybrid from Custom Bow Equipment. This sight comes available in a 1-pin, 3-pin, or a 5-pin sight, and you can get those in 10 thousandths or 19 thousandths pins. What you're going to get in the package: 2 mounting bolts, you're going to get a rheostat light, you're going to get a whole set of sight tapes, and a red sight tape gauge that I'm going to show you how to use briefly. First thing you're going to do, and I recommend that you run the sight as close as you can to your sight. You have 4 positions that you can run this sight. I recommend leaving it in number 4. That's going to have the sight as close to the riser as you can get it. It's a great place to start, and the reason for that is if it's closer to the bow, you're going to run a tighter sight tape, or your pin gap's going to be as narrow as it can be, and that's what you're looking for. If you run it all the way out, you're going to open your pin gap up just a little bit, but running it close will allow you to be tighter. And then if you happen to get in between tapes, if you're just close on a 7 but not quite an 8, if you move that sight out 1 notch after you're done sighting in, it may line up with your numbers perfectly. So it gives you some adjustment and some leeway on your setup. First thing you're going to want to do is take the 2 1024 screws that use a 5/32 Allen wrench and mount your mounting block and sight to your bow. Once you have that done, make sure you're in the number 4 position. Like I said, it'll be as close as you can get to the riser. And you're going to want to use your bottom pin. I have a 5-pin sight here. This is the sight that we probably get the most questions about on how to sight it in correctly. So you want to focus on your bottom pin. People typically sight a 5-pin configuration in 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. That's what the average or the majority of people do. So we're going to try to do that today. Now we want to focus solely on the 60-yard pin, which is going to be my bottom pin, because that's the one I want to utilize as my slider pin. So I want to start close to my target, and typically your pins are centered in the housing, so that's kind of where I like stuff, is in the center of the housing. Everything's more aesthetically pleasing if it's in the center. So my 60-yard pin's fairly close to the bottom. I'm going to leave it right there, but I'm going to use my elevation dial. When I talk about elevation, I'm talking about up and down. So I'm probably going to have to raise my sight a little bit because my 60-yard pin sits pretty low in the housing, and I'm going to want to start close to my target. Make sure your arrows are impacting the target. Yes, we get questions about that. People walk straight out to 60 and try to find a 60 mark, and they lose a half a dozen arrows in the process. We don't want that. So use your bottom yard pin. Start at your 20-yard mark if need be. Make sure you're on target. Work your way back to 30. And that's where we're going to get our first sight mark out. Spend as much time as you need at 30 yards, again, using your bottom pin, and dial this thing in. Elevation you can use, you want to use your main elevation, and on your windage, you want to loosen the locking knob on the bottom right here, and use your windage to go left and right to chase your arrow. If you're hitting left, move your housing left. If you're hitting right, move your housing right. If you're hitting high, you want to raise the dial up a little bit. If you're hitting low, you want to lower it. So just chase your arrow. That'll get you sighted in as quick as possible. Spend as much time as you need at 30, and make sure your 30-yard mark is as perfect as it can be. Take an ink pen or a pencil, and right by the little red indicator needle, you want to make a tiny mark, and we're going to do that real quick. We're going to make a tiny red mark right there. So I have my 30-yard mark. Now, using my 60-yard pin, do a little walk back. Loosen this screw, lower the sight a little bit, step back a few steps, make sure you're on target. Lower the sight a little bit, make sure you're still on target. When you get close to 60 or at 60, it's when you really want to start dialing in. Make sure, if you have to shoot 15 ends, to make sure you've got a good tight group and an accurate 60-yard mark. We're going to say that's my 60-yard mark. I'm going to make another pencil mark. So now I've got a 30 and a 60, and I want to lock that sight down. Now I cannot move that sight. That's exactly what I want. So here, supplied with your sight tapes, is a little red sight tape gauge. You can see it has a 30 and a series of numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, odd on this side, then a 30-yard mark, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, a series of even numbers on that side. You're going to want to line your 30-yard mark up with your top pencil mark, and then your second mark is going to fall on one of these numbers. You may have to check both sides to see which one is correct, but it looks like the marks I made right here, I have a number 8 tape. That's what's telling me my bow setup is, my arrow setup for this particular bow is a number 8 scale. So I want to go in here and find the number 8 scale, which I have right here. Your next step is going to be, leave this right where it's at. I want to show you here. We're going to bolt this scale on. Takes a 3/32 Allen wrench. There's a screw at the top and a screw at the bottom. Again, make sure you don't loosen anything on your sight other than the sight scale screws. Once you take the 2 screws out, you're going to pop this tape off, and we're going to install the number 8. I think the step that most people miss, or they're confused by when they're sighting this in, is they put that tape on and they say, well, my marks don't line up. They don't yet. Your sight position is still at 60 yards. Your bottom pin is sighted in. Your sight is locked down at 60 yards. That's going to be my slider position. I'm going to use my 60-yard pin as my mover, but that's also my new home position. When I get my fixed pin set, I want to use my slider to shoot 95 yards, or I want to run my slider up to 35 yards. When I go back home, I'm going to set my indicator at 60 yards. So now what you want to do, now that I've got this tape bolted on, you can see the needle indicator is at about 63 yards. We don't want that. We want it on 60 because our sight is sighted in at 60. So you want to loosen the little screw that holds your indicator needle on. And you want to slide this red dial to where it lines up with exactly 60 yards. You may need eyes better than mine to make sure it's right, but I'm super close. So now I have my 60-yard pin lined up with my number 8 scale in my home position. I'm now at 60 yards. So now I know that 60 yards right. And if you want to check right now to make sure your scale's right, loosen your knob and you can go back up to 20 yards. You can run that red needle back up to 20 yards, lock it down, and use your bottom pin as your 20-yard pin, because that's your mover. You can check to make sure you've got the correct tape on there. If you're hitting a little bit low, you may need a narrower tape. If you're hitting a little bit high, you may need a wider tape, but you can double check your work right here. Now, once you check, make sure you've got the right tape, roll this back down to 60. That's your home position. And you can individually sight in all your pins. I can step up to 50. I can take a 3/32 Allen wrench and loosen my 50-yard pin, which is going to be the second one from the bottom. This is the Engage Hybrid, so Engage means you loosen this pin. The instructions call for 4 1/4 turns, but I think you can get there with 4. If you loosen that individual pin, which is my 50-yard pin, I can now go to this dial here on top, and when I turn this dial, the only pin that's moving is the 50-yard pin. You can see it work up and down right there. So I can spend all the time I want at 50 yards, make sure I've got that dialed in perfectly, go back in, lock it down. And I can go up to 40 yards, loosen my 40-yard pin, and do the exact same thing. I can micro adjust my 40 all the way down to my 20. Now, I have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 fixed, but I also have my slider pin set up in the home position at 60, and I can run up the scale from 20 to 100 and use my bottom pin to shoot any yardage I choose. One feature on the Engage Hybrid you can utilize if you need to. If you want to change all of your pins in the position of the housing, if you get your pin cap set and you just want to move everything within that housing, we talked about loosening each individual pin so you could only micro adjust that one. That's an awesome feature. But another cool feature is if you want to adjust all 5, loosen all 5 pins at once, and you can run your whole pin gap up and down that housing. If you just want to micro adjust your 20 and 30 because you've changed sight tapes, you can loosen 20 and 30 and just move those 2 pins. So it's another great feature of the Engage Hybrid. If you happen to have purchased the single pin Engage Hybrid, this is by far the easiest one to sight in of the 3. You can use the 30 and 60-yard gauge like the instructions say to use, but you can also use 2 marks of your choice if you're more comfortable doing a 20 and a 60, 20 and 50, 20 and 70, whichever 2 that you choose, you can do that, but this red gauge will no longer be of use because you've chosen your own 2 distances. Let's say you do your own 2, 20 and 60 we'll say. Roll your sight up, go to 20 yards, dial in a 20, make sure you've got it perfect, make a mark. Go back to 60, work your way back, run your sight down, make your second mark. Now you go through your sight tapes and find the one that matches your marks closest to what you have. Say it's a number 9 here. Make sure your sight's locked down. Take the 2 screws out for the white tape. Install your number 9. Loosen the screw on your indicator needle. Roll that red needle up to where it's touching 60. And now lock it back down, and you can move your sight wherever you want to test your scale. Run it up to 20, want it down to 100. You'll find out quickly if you've chosen the correct sight tape.